Welcome to the Good Evening Kitties podcast. This is Melissa, your ghostess with the mostest, and today's episode is Season 2, Episode 2, The Switch. This episode is kind of silly, but it's I don't know, it's kind of fun. It's a fun episode. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about who's in the episode here. First, I'll read the description. Okay, The Switch. Here's what it says in the description for The Switch. To woo a lovely femme, a wealthy codger trades bods with a hunk, but there's a switch to the switch. And so this episode aired April 21st, 1990. It stars William Hickey. He is also, you'd know if you see him, he plays a lot of just normally old guys. He was in National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. He was in Mouse Hunt. It also stars Rick Rossovich, and he was from Top Gun, among other things, and Kelly Preston, who was also in Twins and Jerry Maguire, and many other things. As always, John Kassir is the voice of the Crypt Keeper, and Danny Elfman does the theme song. This episode's screenplay was written by Richard Tuggle and Michael Tav, and this episode was directed by Arnold Schwarzenegger. You know him as actor, governor, and now director. His only other director's credit besides directing this episode was a TV movie called Christmas in Connecticut. So he directed this episode, and he decides to make an intro in the beginning with the Crypt Keeper. So basically the Crypt Keeper is sitting here working out. He's lifting weights that are bones that have two skulls on the ends of them, and he's got a little headband on, a little outfit for working out, and he's working out, and then Arnold Schwarzenegger shows up in the beginning to kind of bring in the episode.
What's the matter with you? You want to keep that 90-pound corpse for the rest of your death? Keep pumping. I tell the story. Tonight's story is about an old man who finds a new wrinkle in the fountain of youth. A twisted tale that we call the Switch.
And he's got a Tales from the Crypt shirt on. Arnold Schwarzenegger breaks in the story, and they opens the book and gets it going while the Crypt Keeper keeps working out. So again, this episode is called The Switch, Season 2, Episode 2. It starts out a really old man who's fairly sickly. He's got a lot of medication sitting next to him while he's in his mansion, and he's stoking a fire. And he's played by William Hickey, and he's basically just hanging out in his mansion, and his butler comes along and asks how he's doing, and he's like,
Are you all right, sir?
I'm in love, Fulton. I'm in love.
His name is Mr. Webster, and he's in love with a woman named Linda, and Linda is quite a bit younger than him. So Fulton is like, well, sir, what if she's just after you for your money?
But are you sure she's interested in you and not your
Money? Don't worry, Fulton. I love Linda. I want to marry her very much. But only if she loves me and not my money.
I haven't told her about my money. We've been hanging out, and he buys her some flowers and comes and visits her, and he hasn't been letting on that he has money or anything like that. And while she's enjoyed his company, he's hoping that she will want to move on and maybe marry him and make him super happy. And he's very much in love with her. Again, I think she's probably at least 40 years younger than him. And this woman, Linda, is played by Kelly Preston. And he's hoping that by marrying Linda and bringing her to the mansion, that it'll bring new life into the house and just a new flair for him to feel young. And again, he's pretty elderly. He has a cane, and, he's trying to just stay in with his youth. But, even his butler's an older man, but they're trying to stay youthful. And he really is thinking Linda's going to be the one for this. So next he's heading over to Linda's apartment, and Fulton is driving him. And he's in a nice, I think a Rolls Royce or something. And they're driving up, and so he has him park a little bit farther away so that Linda can't see and doesn't know he has a assistant or anything like that. And so he brings Linda some flowers, and she already has a whole bunch of flowers in her apartment already. And Kelly Preston is playing Linda again, and she actually, like, as he comes in there and he gives her the flowers and she says thank you, and they're talking and they've been spending time together, and while I'm not quite sure why she's been spending time with him, but he basically pledges his love to him, and his full name is Clayton Webster. And he's sitting there and he's like, you make me very happy and I want to make you happy, please be with me. And she's like, she lets him down pretty nice, I think.
Carlton, I can't.
Why not?
You are so sweet to me, Carlton, and I appreciate that. But when I look into your face, I know that I could never marry you. You look too old.
She's pretty sweet about it. She's like, when I look into your face, I know I could never marry you. And I'm like, ooh. And it's because he looks so old. And she's like, you're old enough to be my grandfather. And I just can't, you're very sweet, but your face is just too old, and I don't want to be with someone who's old. She's not really saying that she doesn't love him, or that she's not, like, has any feelings for him. She just doesn't want to look at his face, I guess, because he has an old face. So, yeah, so he's like, there's only so much I can do about that. So Mr. Webster heads over to, like, a plastic surgeon, and there's some other women in there looking at magazines, and they had some work done, and he's wanting to get work done too. And the woman in there mentions that, this doctor's really good. He can knock off 5 to 10 years off your face and your appearance. And he's like, only 5 to 10. And he's like, I want more than that. So he goes in to talk to the plastic surgeon, and he starts telling them he wants to look, young. And the doctor says, I can make you look 5 to 10, sometimes 15 years younger. And he's like, well, I'm going to look younger than that. And he's like, well, I mean, I could, do a couple other of these procedures, and, maybe we could get 15 to 20 years off what you look. And he's like, no, I want to look like I'm 30. And he's like, Mr. Webster, that's, he's like, I'm not a miracle worker. He's like, I can only do so much, And so he kind of mentions, like, to the doctor, well, I've heard that you can do some other things, or someone who can. And the doctor kind of gets quiet, and he's like, okay, but this referral is going to cost you. I don't want anything, like, traced back. He knows of a guy. And so this doctor sends him to a man who, he is your ideal scientist, mad scientist. He lives, like, in this old mansion-y kind of place with, like, a gate, and Fulton drops him off at the gate and is like, I'll just wait for you in the car, and are telling how long it took his visit. But he shows up and he knocks on the door, and of course the doctor has a man who's kind of like an Igor who answers the door and lets him in. And this doctor lives in this, like, dilapidated, well, it's not really dilapidated, it's just like in a basement, and you would think like Frankenstein's monster kind of thing. And he's got really thick Coke bottle glasses, and he's not super attractive himself, so I find this a little interesting that this is the proposition. But basically what he's saying is that if Mr. Webster pays him $1 million, he will do the procedure where he will give him a face transplant.
The anesthetic, the nerve work, the technology, $1 million.
$1 million?
It's not so much, Mr. Webster. In fact, for a miracle, it's not much at all.
But how can I be certain that it would work?
And he's like, $1 million? It's just a simple operation, which I'm like, no, it's not. But even the doctor's like, no, it's not. And he's like, basically, it's $100,000 for the surgery and $900,000 to pay off Hans. And Hans is the guy who's going to donate his face. And so in comes in Hans. And Hans is this, he was genetically bred for this, apparently. He looks like he's already like 30 or 40, at least 35. And he looks like he's not quite all there. I don't know. But he's a very nice specimen. He's well built. He's muscular. He's young. I don't know how fast he grew, this guy, or if this guy's just been waiting around for 35 years, but, he brings in Hans, and Hans is very excited to get this money, and he will donate his face. And that's kind of what he's been bred to do, or genetically, he's like the best genes that you could find. And, he meets Hans, and he's talking to him, and he's like, well, what's in it for you and everything? And he's just like, well, the money. I just want the money, and he's willing to get an old man's face to, take the money. And so Mr. Webster agrees, and they cut to the surgery scene, and they're down in the basement. I'm not super sure how sterile this dungeon lab is. I mean, he's got all the clean tools and everything's like, but it's, there's webs and it's dusty probably. And I'm just like, okay. And so it just shows a lot of tubes like shooting red liquid and, things like that. And then the surgery goes on.
Don't be frightened, Mr. Webster. Just take a peek in the mirror. Eh? What do you think?
It's not what I expected.
Now, don't worry. It will take time for your face to heal and for your features to take on their permanent shape. And then you will look just like Hans.
I can't wait for Linda to see me.
And what's interesting to me is that Fulton has been waiting outside, I think, this whole time. Well, I mean, he dropped him off at night and now it's the day. So I guess it's been overnight that he's just been chilling in the car and never going in to see what was going on. But Mr. Webster sure bounced back pretty quick. I think usually when you get plastic surgery, there's quite a bit of swelling and bandages and things, but he just walks right out and he's got this face and Fulton doesn't notice it right away and he sees it and he's like, oh my gosh, what did you do? And he's like, well, let's go see Linda, So I don't think it's been really too long, but he heads over to go see Linda. And she answers the door and she's like, whoa, right away, and his face doesn't look great. It looks like what you would think. It looks like they took the guy's face and stretched it over his face. I mean, they did a good job with that because it does look pretty macabre and fake. It looks unnatural. So it's and he's got younger hair. He doesn't have the old hair anymore. They took the whole skin, the hair and everything and put it over. But it's you can tell they kind of, it just looks not botched, but just he had something done. It looks like it was done. And so he goes to, Linda is not very pleased with the plastic surgery. She doesn't seem like she super thinks the new face is hot or anything either. But she also points out that she says his body is still old and decrepit. And his face, like I said, his face doesn't look supernatural. She doesn't really mention that, but she's still saying, I could never be with you because your body is old. You have an old body, and I don't like that. And she has some great red lipstick here. I really like her red lipstick. I don't know. Something like a good red lipstick really pops some people's faces. But yeah, hers looks nice. And so she's like, I still can't be with you. And he's like, but this is what you wanted. And she's like, well, not really, but okay. I would be pretty shocked anyway if some guy did this for me. Because I'd still be like, well, no, yeah. I mean, again, yeah, you have an old body, but I'd be like, what happened? How did you do this? I didn't know this was a thing that could happen in a night. So she's not pleased. And so he immediately goes back to the doctor and he's like, something needs to be done. Can you do anything more? And the doctor's like, well, I can get you a new torso. Again, he's going to take it from Hans. I guess he'll get some new arms and a new stomach and a chest, so he gets a new torso. And the torso is $2 million. And now, after he gets the torso, they head over to Venice Beach. At least it looks like that. I think they're over in California. They head over to Venice Beach, and, he's working out and lifting at Muscle Beach over there. And Linda's there with him and kind of checking him out. And he's able to, he's in a really good physical condition. And now his face has kind of gone back to normal. It's obvious. The guy who plays Hans is now pretending to be him. He has Mr. Webster's voice still. So he still has an old man's voice, but now the actors have kind of switched positions. So now his torso, everything looks great. It's very muscular and young. His face is not so freaky looking anymore. And he's working out and he's got a pair of sweatpants and shoes on. And they're at the beach and Linda's, really noticing him. And she's really into him and they're holding hands and, now she's attracted to him, even though he's still got Mr. Webster's voice, which is a little off-putting because it doesn't look like that would be his voice, but it's not super bad. And so, he's showing off how he's lifting and they're walking down the beach holding hands. And you're like, this is, they're like, this is great and I'm so happy. And I'm not sure if she's being vain. I guess she is. I don't know. There's no other guys. You have to be I don't know. There's no one else you can find. So, this guy is changing his body for you. I don't know. And so he's like, well, let's go swimming. She's like, okay. So they head over to the little changing areas to get dressed. And when he walks out, she notices that the second half of him, the lower half, is still old. He's still got old skinny legs and he's pale and that's not working for her.
What's wrong?
It's your legs. They're so scrawny and old. Look at the sagging skin and the veins.
Oh, for God's sakes, Linda, what more do you want? Won't you ever be satisfied?
I know what I want, Carlton, and you just don't have it.
And really, when I think about it, it's gotta look pretty weird. Because he's like all built and tan on top, and then the bottom is like these skinny little white bird legs. It didn't occur to me that, there's other parts of him too that are old. That are, the doctor points out later is fairly important. There's other transplants he might need. And so he's like, fine, whatever. Okay, so like I said, he goes back to the doctor again. But before he does, he has to let his butler go and sell his house because it's starting to really add up. I mean, he's already paid at least probably about $4 million by the time he paid off the other doctor of his money. So he had to let Fulton go and, like I said, sell the house. And so he's kind of bummed about that, but he's like, well, if Linda will love me, she doesn't know I have a lot of money. So, let's do this. So he goes and he's talking to the doctor who's mentioning about the other things he could get, which I feel like he should have probably did this to begin with.
Well, you're forgetting the most crucial limb of all. The limb that if you truly wish to satisfy your lover, is the limb that she would want to replace most of all.
In reality, he should have just had a brain transplant into Han's body is what he should have done. If this guy can transport all these organs and things over without rejection, at least for right now, why not just get a brain transplant? I would have just been like, put my brain into this dude, and if this can work, And so now the doctor says it's $2 million for the leg transplant, like $1 million for each leg. So $2 million for that and an extra $1 million if he wants a penis transplant. And he kind of points out, he's like, that's something Linda's probably going to want. And everything probably needs to be changed. She's going to, which I think after you get out of the torso surgery, you'd be like, I still look kind of weird. But so now it's an extra, altogether an extra $3 million. So now he's up into $6 to $7 million for this whole transplant, for like a whole body transplant. And so he gets it done. And now he's, complete. Looks just like Hans, has the voice of himself. And so now he heads over to Linda's apartment. And people are asking if he's interested in looking at the apartment. He's like, no, I'm here to see Linda. Linda has moved out. And she moved up somewhere, in a nice part of town. And he's like, whoa, what? So I'm assuming this time, like, it probably took a little longer with this surgery by the time he healed and everything. So I think it's probably been like at least a couple weeks, maybe a couple months. And so he finds out her address and he goes over there to her place. And turns out when he gets to the door, Linda, he knocks on the door, Linda answers it, and she's in like a nice robe and she's got jewels on, jewelry on, and she's drinking like champagne. And it turns out Linda married Hans because out comes Carlton's body. Well, I mean, Carlton, he's looking at himself. Carlton comes out, he's got the mind of Hans, and he's super rich because he has all of Carlton's money. And now he also finds out Fulton is the butler, which to me, I'm like, this is like, what? Like, there's a lot of questions. So Carlton is like, oh my, I can't believe this. And she's like, well,
I'm already married.
What?
You're nice, Carlton, but I needed a man of financial means who could make me comfortable for the rest of my life.
Married?
A man with enough money so I'd never have to worry about being poor.
I need someone who can take care of me and can be financially secure. And even though she didn't really ask him about how much money he had, I guess she's assuming maybe after all this he's broke anyway. But part of this also seems a little bit like it was planned to begin with. But it's like, this one was a little confusing because it's like, really? Because then now she's with Hans, who's young in the mind, but he has an old body, which is something that she didn't want to begin with. But now that he has money, she's willing to settle, and Hans is okay with that. And then, so now Clayton realizes, maybe he should have just been okay with what he looked like to begin with and just kept his money. But then, it still probably wouldn't have worked because she would have just been in on it for the money. But I think what happened is she got sick of waiting because apparently she got to get married. I don't know. She's only like 30 years old, but she's like, I have to get married apparently. So she got sick of waiting around and somehow thought this was okay to marry his body with. That's why I think part of her was probably in on some of it. But this one's just kind of weird because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense And it's just kind of like, what? And he just kind of basically got screwed over is what happened. So now he's broke, and he may be youthful, but he has no money and not the girl he wants. So that's basically how this episode ends, with him just freaking out and seeing his butler, and his butler just kind of ignores that that it's got switched around. He's just happy to have a job back. And so it seems really weird. So that's basically the end of this episode. This one, like I said, was a little confusing. It was still fun because just the characters in it, and just seeing how he changes and things like that. But technically, I think they could probably both do better, and I guess in a way she did, but I don't know if that also means that Hans in Clayton's body will live longer as an old man. I'm not sure how that all works, or if he has old organs. I don't know, but it's a show, but that's basically how it ends. Crypt Keeper, you're so punny. So the best Crypt Keeper pun is...
Poor Carlton. Looks like he blew it. But no pain, no gain.
I get it. No pain, no gain. Because he had to surgically do stuff and work out. I don't know. Yeah, this pun was alright. And so there's a little bit of trivia here from IMDb that I have about this episode. The intro to this episode features a cameo by Arnold Schwarzenegger, like I said, who once shared the screen with Rick Rossovich, who played Hans in The Terminator. So they were both in The Terminator together, the guy who plays Hans and Arnold Schwarzenegger, so that's kind of cool. Another trivia fact here is this marks the first time that the original story was actually published in the Tales from the Crypt comic book. All the previous stories originated in other EC comic titles. So this episode is actually from a original Tales from the Crypt book, not an EC Comics. Though they do show an EC comic type comic book cover in the beginning, but it was still part of the Tales from the Crypt comic book series for the first time. So that's pretty much the end of this episode. Season 2, Episode 2, The Switch. Next episode will be Season 2, Episode 3, Cutting Cards. So thanks for listening. You can find this podcast, the Good Evening Kitties podcast, on Stitcher, iTunes, Podbean, Podbay. And, like, rate, review, subscribe, tell anyone, if you like this podcast, let other people know. And thanks again for listening.
I just had quite a scare. I actually thought my heart